Part 2 of 3 of The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft. Narrated by Kairos of the Threefold Manifold. September 10th, 2024. All this time, the great gaunt side of Inglanek was looming up higher and higher as Carter approached it. There were sparse trees on the lower slopes and feeble shrubs above them, and then the bare, hideous rock rose spectral into the sky to mix with frost and ice and eternal snow. Carter could see the rifts and ruggedness of that somber stone, and did not welcome the prospect of climbing it. In places there were solid streams of lava, and scoriae heaps that littered slopes and ledges. 90 aeons ago, before even the gods had danced upon its pointed peak, that mountain had spoken with fire and roared with the voices of the inner thunders. Now it towered all silent and sinister, bearing on the hidden side that secret titanic image whereof rumor told. And there were caves in that mountain, which might be empty and alone with elder darkness, or might, if legend spoke truly, hold horrors of a form not to be surmised. The ground sloped upwards to the foot of Inglanek, thinly covered with scrub oaks and ash trees, and strewn with bits of rock, lava, and ancient cinder. There were the charred embers of many camps, where the lava-gatherers were wont to stop, and several rude altars which they had built either to propitiate the Great Ones, or to ward off what they dreamed of in Inglanek's high passes and labyrinthine caves. At evening, Carter reached the farthermost pile of embers and camped for the night, tethering his zebra to a sapling and wrapping himself well in his blankets before going to sleep. And all through the night, a voonith howled distantly from the shore of some hidden pool, but Carter felt no fear of that amphibious terror, since he had been told with certainty that not one of them dares even approach the slope of Inglanek. In the clear sunshine of morning, Carter began the long ascent, taking his zebra as far as that useful beast could go, but tying it to a stunted ash tree when the floor of the thin wood became too steep. Thereafter, he scrambled up alone, first through the forest with its ruins of old villages and overgrown clearings, and then over the tough grass where anemic shrubs grew here and there. He regretted coming clear of the trees, since the slope was very precipitous, and the whole thing rather dizzying. At length he began to discern all the countryside spread out beneath him whenever he looked about. The deserted huts of the image-makers, the groves of resin trees, and the camps of those who gathered from them, the woods where prismatic macaws nest and sing, and even a hint very far away of the shores of Yath, of those forbidding ancient ruins whose name is forgotten. Then the soil became meager, with great patches of bare rock cropping out, and now and then the nest of a condor in a crevice. Finally, there was nothing at all but the bare rock, and had it not been very rough and weathered, he could scarcely have ascended farther. Knobs, ledges, and pinnacles, however, helped greatly, and it was cheering to see occasionally the sign of some lava-gatherer scratched clumsily in the friable stone, and know that the wholesome human creatures had been there before him. After a certain height, the presence of man was further shewn by handholds and footholds, hewn where they were needed, and by little quarries and excavations where some choice vein or stream of lava had been found. In one place a narrow ledge had been chopped artificially to an especially rich deposit far to the right of the main line of ascent. Once or twice Carter dared to look around, and was almost stunned by the spread of landscape below. All the island betwixt him and the coast lay open to his sight, with Baharna's stone terraces, in the smoke of its chimneys, mystical in the distance, and beyond that, the illimitable southern sea, with all its curious secrets. Thus far there had been much winding around the mountain, so that the farther and carven side was still hidden. Carter now saw a ledge running upward and to the left, which seemed to head the way he wished, and this course he took in hope that it might prove continuous. After 10 minutes, he saw it was indeed no cul-de-sac, but that it led steeply on in an arc that would, unless suddenly interrupted or deflected, bring him after a few hours climbing to that unknown southern slope overlooking the desolate crags and the accursed valley of lava. As new country came into view below him, he saw that it was bleaker and wilder than those seaward lands he had traversed. The mountain's side, too, was somewhat different, being here pierced by curious cracks and caves not found on the straighter route he had left. Some of these were above him, and some beneath him, all opening on sheerly perpendicular cliffs and wholly unreachable by the feet of man. The air was very cold now, but so hard was the climbing that he did not mind it. Only the increasing rarity bothered him, and he thought that perhaps it was this which had turned the heads of other travelers and excited those absurd tales of night gods, whereby they explained the loss of such climbers as fell from these perilous paths. He was not much impressed by the travelers' tales, but had a good curved scimitar in case of any trouble. All lesser thoughts were lost in the wish to see that carven face, which might set him on the track of the gods atop unknown Kadath. At last, in the fearsome iciness of upper space, he came round fully to the hidden side of Ingrenek, and saw in infinite gulfs below him the lesser crags and sterile abysses of lava, which marked olden wrath of the great ones. There was unfolded, too, a vast expanse of country to the south, but it was a desert land without fair fields or cottage chimneys, and seemed to have no ending. No trace of the sea was visible on this side, for Oriab is a great island. Black caverns and odd crevices were still numerous on the sheer vertical cliffs, but none of them was accessible to a climber. There now loomed aloft a great beetling mass which hampered the upward view, and Carter was for a moment shaken with doubt lest it prove impassable. Poised in windy insecurity, miles above earth, with only space and death on one side, and only slippery walls of rock on the other, he knew for a moment the fear that makes men shun Ingrenek's hidden side. He could not turn round, yet the sun was already low. If there were no way aloft, the night would find him crouching there still, and the dawn would not find him at all. But there was a way, and he saw it in due season. Only a very expert dreamer could have used those imperceptible footholds, yet to Carter they were sufficient. Surmounting now the outward hanging rock, he found the slope above much easier than that now, since a great glacier's melting had left a generous space with loam and ledges. To the left a precipice dropped straight from the unknown heights to unknown depths, with a cave's dark mouth just out of reach above him. Elsewhere, however, the mountain slanted back strongly, and even gave him space to lean and rest. He felt from the chill that he must be near the snow line, and looked up to see what glittering pinnacles might be shining in that late ruddy sunlight. Surely enough, there was the snow uncounted thousands of feet above, and below it a great beetling crag like that he had just climbed, hanging there forever in bold outline. And when he saw that crag, he gasped and cried out aloud, and clutched at the jagged rock in awe, for the Titan bulge had not stayed as Earth's dawn had shaped it, but gleamed red and stupendous in the sunset, with the carved and polished features of a god. Stern and terrible shone that face that the sunset lit with fire. How vast it was no mind can ever measure, but Carter knew at once that man could never have fashioned it. It was a god chiseled by the hands of the gods, and it looked down haughtily and majestic upon the seeker. Rumor had said it was strange and not to be mistaken, and Carter saw that it was indeed so, for those long, narrow eyes and long-lobed ears, and that thin nose and pointed chin, all spoke of a race that is not of men, but of gods. He clung overawed in that lofty and perilous eyrie, even though it was this which he had expected and come to find. For there is in a god's face more of marvel than prediction can tell, and when that face is vaster than a temple, and seen looking downward at sunset, in the scriptic silences of that upper world from whose dark lava it was divinely hewn of old, the marvel is so strong that none may escape it. Here, too, was the added marvel of recognition, for although he had planned to search all Dreamland over for those whose likeness to this face might mark them as the god's children, he now knew that he needed not do so. Certainly, the great face carven on that mountain was of no strange sort, but the kin of such as he had seen often in the taverns of the seaport Celiphias, which lies in Uth-Nargai, beyond the Tanarian hills, and is ruled over by that King Karains, whom Carter once knew in waking life. Every year sailors with such a face come in dark ships from the north to trade their onyx for the carved jade and spun gold and little red singing birds of Celiphias, and it was clear that these could be no others than the hall gods he sought. Where they dwelt, there must be cold waste lie close, and within it unknown Kadath and its onyx castle for the great ones. So to Celiphias he must go, far distant from the Isle of Oriab, and in such parts as would take him back to Dylath-Leen, and up the sky to the bridge by Near, and again into the enchanted wood of the Zoogs, whence the way would bend northward through the garden lands by Ukranos, to the gilded spires of Thrawn, where he might find a galleon bound over the Serenarian Sea. But dusk was now thick, and the great carven face looked down even sterner in shadow. Perched on that ledge night found the seeker, and in the blackness he might neither go down nor go up, but only stand and cling and shiver in that narrow place till the day came, praying to keep awake lest sleep loose his hold and send him down the dizzy miles of air to the crags and sharp rocks of the accursed valley. The stars came out, but save for them there was only black nothingness in his eyes, nothingness leagued with death, against whose beckoning he might do no more than cling to the rocks and lean back away from an unseen brink. The last thing of earth that he saw in the gloaming was a condor soaring close to the westward precipice beside him, and darting screaming away when it came near the cave whose mouth yawned just out of reach. Suddenly, without a warning sound in the dark, Carter felt his curved scimitar drawn stealthily out of his belt by some unseen hand. Then he heard it clatter down over the rocks below, and between him and the Milky Way he thought he saw a very terrible outline of something noxiously thin, and horned, and tailed, and bat-winged. Other things, too, had begun to blot out patches of stars west of him, as if a flock of vague entities were flapping thickly and silently out of that inaccessible cave in the face of the precipice. Then a sort of cold, rubbery arm seized his neck, and something else seized his feet, and he was lifted inconsiderately up and swung about in space. Another minute, and the stars were gone, and Carter knew that the night gaunts had got him. They bore him breathless into that cliffside cavern and through monstrous labyrinths beyond. When he struggled, as at first he did by instinct, they tickled him with deliberation. They made no sound at all themselves, and even their membranous wings were silent. They were frightfully cold and damp and slippery, and their paws kneaded one detestably. Soon they were plunging hideously downward through inconceivable abysses in a whirling, giddying, sickening rush of dank, tomb-like air, and Carter felt they were shooting into the ultimate vortex of shrieking and demonic madness. He screamed again and again, but whenever he did so, the black paws tickled him with greater subtlety. Then he saw a sort of gray phosphorescence about, and guessed they were coming even to that inner world of subterrene horror, of which dim legends tell, and which is lit only by the pale death fire wherewith reeks the ghoulish air and the primal mists of the pits at earth's core. At last, far below him, he saw faint lines of gray and ominous pinnacles, which he knew must be the fabled peaks of Throck. Awful and sinister, they stand in the haunted disk of sunless and eternal depths, higher than man may reckon, and guarding terrible valleys where the Dahols crawl and burrow nastily. But Carter preferred to look at them than only at his captors, which were indeed shocking and uncouth black things with smooth, oily, whale-like surfaces, unpleasant horns that curved inward toward each other, bat wings whose beating made no sound, ugly, prehensile paws, and barbed tails that lashed needlessly and disquietingly. And worst of all, they never spoke or laughed, and never smiled because they had no faces at all to smile with, but only a suggestive blankness where a face ought to be. All they ever did was clutch and fly and tickle. That was the way of night gaunts. As the band flew lower, the peaks of Throck rose gray and towering on all sides, and one saw clearly that nothing lived on that austere and impressive granite of the endless twilight. At still lower levels, the death fires in the air gave out, and one met only the primal blackness of the void save aloft where the thin peaks stood out goblin-like. Soon the peaks were very far away, and nothing but great rushing winds with the dankness of nethermost grottos in them. Then, in the end, the night gaunts landed on a floor of unseen things which felt like layers of bones, and left Carter all alone in that black valley. To bring him thither was the duty of the night gaunts that guard Ingrenek, and this done, they flapped away silently. When Carter tried to trace their flight, he found he could not, since even the peaks of Throck had faded out of sight. There was nothing, anywhere, but blackness, and horror, and silence, and bones. Now Carter knew from a certain source that he was in the Vale of Panath, where crawl and burrow the enormous Dahols. But he did not know what to expect, because no one has ever seen a Dahol, or even guessed what such a thing may be like. Dahols are known only by dim rumor, from the rustling they make amongst mountains of bones, and the slimy touch they have when they wriggle past one. They cannot be seen, because they creep only in the dark. Carter did not wish to meet a Dahol, so listened intently for any sound in the unknown depths of bones about him. Even in this fearsome place, he had a plan and an objective, for whispers of Panath were not unknown to one with whom he had talked much in the old days. In brief, it seemed fairly likely that this was the spot into which all the ghouls of the waking world cast the refuse of their feastings, and that if he but had good luck, he might stumble upon that mighty crag taller than even Throck's peaks, which marks the edge of their domain. Showers of bones would tell him where to look, and once found, he could call to a ghoul to let down a ladder, for, strange to say, he had a very singular link with these terrible creatures. A man he had known in Boston, a painter of strange pictures, with a secret studio in an ancient and unhallowed alley near a graveyard, had actually made friends with the ghouls, and had taught him to understand the simpler part of their disgusting meeping and glibbering. This man had vanished at last, and Carter was not sure but that he might find him now, and use for the first time in Dreamland that faraway English of his dim waking life. In any case, he felt he could persuade a ghoul to guide him out of Panath, and it would be better to meet a ghoul, which one can see, than a Dahol, which one cannot see. So Carter walked in the dark, and ran when he thought he heard something among the bones underfoot. Once he bumped into a stony slope, and knew it must be the base of one of Throck's peaks. Then at last he heard a monstrous rattling and clatter which reached far up in the air, and became sure he had come nigh of the crag of the ghouls. He was not sure he could be heard from this valley miles below, but realized that the inner world has strange laws. As he pondered, he was struck by a flying bone so heavy that it must have been a skull, and therefore realizing his nearness to the fateful crag, he sent up, as best he might, that meeping cry, which is the call of the ghoul. Sound travels slowly, so it was some time before he heard a gibbering answer, but it came at last, and before long he was told that a rope ladder would be lowered. The wait for this was very tense, since there was no telling what might not have been stirred up among those bones by his shouting. Indeed, it was not long before he actually did hear a vague rustling afar off. As this thoroughly approached, he became more and more uncomfortable, for he did not wish to move away from the spot where the ladder would come. Finally, the tension grew almost unbearable, and he was about to flee in panic when the thud of something on the newly heaped bones nearby drew his notice from the other sound. It was the ladder, and after a minute of groping, he had it taut in his hands. But the other sound did not cease, and followed him even as he climbed. He had gone fully 5 feet from the ground when the rattling beneath waxed emphatic, and was a good 10 feet up when something swayed the ladder from below. At a height which must have been 15 or 20 feet, he felt his whole side brushed by a great slippery length, which grew alternately convex and concave with wriggling, and hereafter he climbed desperately to escape the unendurable nuzzling of that loathsome and overfed hole whose form no man might see. For hours he climbed with aching and blistered hands, seeing again the grey death fire and Throck's uncomfortable pinnacles. At last he discerned above him the projecting edge of the great crag of the ghouls, whose vertical side he could not glimpse, and hours later he saw a curious face peering over it as a gargoyle peers over a parapet of Notre Dame. This almost made him lose his hold through faintness, but a moment later he was himself again, for his vanished friend Richard Pickman had once introduced him to a ghoul, and he knew well their canine faces and slumping forms and unmentionable idiosyncrasies. So he had himself well under control when that hideous thing pulled him out of the dizzy emptiness over the edge of the crag, and did not scream at the partly consumed refuse heaped at one side, or at the squatting circles of ghouls who gnawed and watched curiously. He was now on a dim-litten plain, whose sole topographic features were great boulders and the entrances of burrows. The ghouls were in general respectful, even if one did attempt to pinch him, while several others eyed his leanness speculatively. Through patient glibbering, he made inquiries regarding his vanished friend, and found he had become a ghoul of some prominence in abysses nearer the waking world. A greenish, elderly ghoul offered to conduct him to Pickman's present habitation, so despite a natural loathing, he followed the creature into a capacious burrow, and crawled after him for hours in the blackness of rank mold. They emerged on a dim plain strewn with singular relics of earth, old gravestones, broken urns, and grotesque fragments of monuments, and Carter realized with some emotion that he was probably nearer the waking world than at any other time since he had gone down the 700 steps from the cavern of flame to the gate of deeper slumber. There, on a tombstone of 1768, stolen from the granary burying ground in Boston, sat a ghoul which was once the artist Richard Upton Pickman. It was naked and rubbery, and had acquired so much of the ghoulish physiognomy that its human age was already obscure. But it still remembered a little English, and was able to converse with Carter in grunts and monosyllables, helped out now and then by the glibbering of ghouls. When it learned that Carter wished to get to the Enchanted Wood, and from there to the city of Celefay, in Uthnar-Gai, beyond the Tanarian hills, it seemed rather doubtful, for these ghouls of the waking world do no business in the graveyards of Upper Dreamland, leaving that to the red-footed womps that are spawned in dead cities. And many things intervene betwixt their gulf and the Enchanted Wood, including the terrible kingdom of the Gugs. The Gugs, hairy and gigantic, once reared stone circles in the wood and made strange sacrifices to the other gods and the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. Until one night an abomination of theirs reached the ears of Earth's gods, and they were banished to caverns below. Only a great trapdoor of stone with an iron ring connects the abyss of the earth ghouls with the Enchanted Wood, and this the Gugs are afraid to open because of a curse. That a mortal dreamer could traverse their cavern realm and leave by that door is inconceivable, for mortal dreamers were their former food, and they have legends of the toothsomeness of such dreamers even though banishment has restricted their diet to the ghasts, those repulsive beings which die on the light, and which live in the vaults of Zin, and leap on long hind legs like kangaroos. So the ghoul that was Pickman advised Carter either to leave the abyss at Sarkamond, that deserted city in the valley below Leng, where black nitrous hallways guarded by winged diorite lions lead down from Dreamland to the lower gulfs, or to return through a churchyard to the waking world and begin the quest anew down the 70 steps of light slumber to the cavern of flame, and the 700 steps to the gate of deeper slumber and the enchanted wood. This, however, did not suit the seeker, for he knew nothing of the way from Leng to Uth-Nargai, and was likewise reluctant to awake, lest he forget all that he had so far gained in this dream. It was disastrous to his quest to forget the august and celestial faces of those seamen from the north who traded onyx in Selaphe, and who, being the sons of gods, must point the way to the cold waste and Kadath, where the great ones dwell. After much persuasion, the ghoul consented to guide his guest inside the great wall of the Gug's kingdom. There was one chance that Carter might be able to steal through that twilight realm of circular stone towers, at an hour when the giants would be all gorged and snoring indoors, and reach the central tower, with the sign of Koth upon it, which has the stairs leading up to that stone trapdoor in the enchanted wood. Hickman even consented to lend 3 ghouls to help with the tombstone lever in raising the stone door, for of ghouls the Gugs are somewhat afraid, and they often flee from their own colossal graveyards when they are seen feasting there. He also advised Carter to disguise as a ghoul himself, shaving the head he had allowed to grow, for some ghouls have none, wallowing naked in the mold to get the correct surface, and loping in the usual slumping way, with his clothes carried in a bundle, as if it were a choice morsel from a tomb. They would reach the city of Gugs, which is coterminous with the whole kingdom, through the proper burrows, emerging in a cemetery not far from the stair containing the Tower of Koth. They must beware, however, of a large cave near the cemetery, for this is the mouth of the vaults of Zin, and the vindictive ghasts are always on watch there murderously for denizens of the upper abyss who hunt and prey on them. The ghasts try to come out when the Gugs sleep, and they attack ghouls as readily as Gugs, for they cannot discriminate. The Gugs have a sentry at a narrow in the vaults of Zin, but he is often drowsy, and is sometimes surprised by a party of ghasts. Though ghasts cannot live in real light, they can endure the gray twilight of the abyss for hours. If you enjoyed the content here, we are on X, Instagram, Spotify, BitChute, and TikTok. And if you wish to join us for perhaps a little bit more directly engaged conversation, the Threefold at a Factory on Discord. There's always one-time donations that could be made by Stream Elements, as is linked in the description, or if you wish to be on a more subscriptive basis, Patreon. Last but not least, I hope to see you all in the next entry to our series. Until then, never miss your opportunity.